Welcome to the creative community. I'm your host, David Starkey, and my guest this time is author Pico Iyer. Pico, welcome.
So good to see you again, David.
Yeah, it's been, what, 12 or 15 years since you were last on the show.
I think so.
So exciting to have you here and to talk about your new book, A Flame, Learning from Silence. It's a book that is really set kind of on the Central Coast, mostly north of here. But there's a lot about Santa Barbara. There is a lot about fire.
Yes.
There's also a lot about inner fire, too.
Yes.
For people who don't know the book, can you sort of set up what it's about?
Yes. So like so many people in Santa Barbara, I, many years ago, lost my house in a wildfire, lost everything in the world, was reduced to sleeping on a friend's floor for many months. And then another friend who taught at a local school came and he saw me on the floor and said, "Come on, Pico, you can do better."
Right.
And he told me how he took his high school classes every spring to this quiet retreat house 4 hours up the coast in Big Sur, California.
Right.
And I thought, well, at least if I go there, I'll have a bed to sleep in, a desk, nice garden overlooking the Pacific Ocean, all the food I could eat in those days for $30 a night.
Wow.
So I found myself driving up to the last place I would ever expect to go otherwise, which is a Catholic monastery. I'm not a Christian, and I never would have been inclined probably to stay in a hermitage like that. But circumstance sort of made it an attractive possibility. And when I stepped into that silence, it was so liberating, and it was as if all the clutter in my head fell away, and I was released to something much wider that, as you know, I started going back again and again, more than 100 times now over the last 34 years, and it's really been my secret home and steadied me. And even though the monks are Catholic, they're generous enough to open their hearts and their homes to anyone who comes, male or female, of any background or all. So it's been a great sanctuary, and I've been thinking recently about how if I hadn't gone through the process of losing the fire, I may never have had the door opened to this wonderful sanctuary.
Yeah.
And you know, some of my friends have been asking me, why did I bring out this book after 34 years of going there? And I think for 3 reasons. The first is I've never seen the world as distracted as now, and I think we're all longing for release from our cell phones and from the rush of the world. And the second is I've never seen the world as divided as it is now. And I think the beauty of silence is it's beyond discussion. It lives on the far side of all our words and our assumptions. And the third is that I've never seen my friends as despairing and anxious as they are now. And of course, we all know there are so many reasons to be anxious between wildfires and plague and wars and runaway technologies, tumultuous politics. And so as a writer, I feel my job is to shine a light on places of inspiration and hope. And my monk friends, who are often encircled by fire, really represent a model of confidence. I loved the way you began, because I think we're all facing this question: how do we keep the inner fires of conviction and confidence alive when the external fires are wiping out everything that we love? And we all sense the world's on fire, literally, but metaphorically.
Yeah, and one of the things about this book is I think that it could be read 50, 100 years from now, and read with the same attention and insight, because you don't really mention specific political things. You know, you mention, and you said it's 30 years. The years kind of blend together. You know, there's a roughly chronological through line, I think, but I feel like you're there, here, and there, but it's always kind of circling back in there without reference to specific political events. There's references to your wife, to stories that you're doing, but there's a kind of timeless quality to it, I guess.
I love that, David. I mean, it takes a fellow writer and poet to see that, but exactly so, because when I go there, I'm stepping out of the calendar into a kind of timeless realm. And you probably know the Greeks had 2 words for time. One is chronos, which is the world of the clock. And the other is kairos, which is kind of sacred time, when we feel like we're touching eternity. And I think everyone watching the show knows that in Big Sur, the calendar falls away. Already you're very far from the outside world as soon as you're in that unworldly stretch of coastline. But of course, in a hermitage in Big Sur, even more so. And in fact, one of the trailers where I sometimes stay is called Kairos, Sacred Time.
Perfect.
So you're absolutely right. I took great pains to take out all the time markers, as it were. And partly because the experience never changes. I mean, over 34 years, that's half my lifetime, so I've grown much older, and there have been changes there. They add trailers, monks have come and gone. but fundamentally it's an invitation to something beyond the realm of time.
One of the things that I found really interesting was it is a place outside of time, and you're going there, and clearly the silence is important to you. But you talk about writing all the time. That it inspires something new. That you had mountains of notes. That was one of the processes of making this book, was getting rid of stuff so that you could come up with this book.
Getting rid of a huge amount of stuff. I had 4,000 pages of notes.
4,000 pages.
And I wanted to make something as short and piercing as a haiku, because this is really a very short book.
It is, yeah.
But one of the funny things about being there is that, as you say, it's probably the most creative place I've ever been. I literally can't stop scribbling. But after I'd made a few retreats there, I realized that none of the scribbling could really translate to the world, to the rest of the world, because it was too calm and peaceful. It was above the clouds. And it had the feel of somebody whispering to himself in an empty room, partly because I was essentially, So I took lots of those notes, but when my friends say, oh, this is ideal for a writer's retreat, I say, no, it's the one place where I allow myself not to write officially. But just to think what I ought to write, and to think what I need to do in the next 6 months. And if my friends ask me why I go, I say it's to remember what I love. Because I find when I'm driving down State Street from the bank to the CVS to Vaughn's, 1,000 things are coming in on me, and I can't really sift what's essential from what's trivial. But as soon as I go there, it seems like all the trivial part falls away, and I remember what really matters in my life and what I should give myself to. And so it's a good place for revising, it's a beautiful place for reading, and it's a great place for scribbling notes to myself, but not to the world at large.
And one of the central parts of the monastery, or of the hermitage, is the bookstore. You're always going to the bookstore. You're meeting someone at the bookstore. Someone is, recommending a book. Could you talk about that?
Thank you for spotting that, because of course it's the one place where if you're lonely you can chat. There's always a monk on duty. But one of the interesting things about the bookstore is I choose books at random when I'm there. And that's a metaphor for the fact I'm not making my own choices. When I go into Chaucer's here in Santa Barbara, I've got a list of 6 books I want. When I go into the bookstore, I let the book find me. And that's how my whole days go. In other words, I understand what a holiday is, because it really feels like a holy day. In other words, every day when I wake up there, I have no agenda for the day. I'll walk and see the sunrise over the hills, or I'll just sit in my garden and look at the light on the ocean, or I'll pick a book at random from my suitcase. But everything is random, and so it feels like the moment is an intuition determining what I do instead of my mind. And I think that's part of the liberation, because usually I'm probably like you. My regular day, I'm captive to my habits. I wake up at this time, I have to do this, I have to do a certain number of hours at my desk. There, I'm free of it, and I let myself go places I would never imagine. So the bookstore, I'll pick a book that I would never read otherwise. And suddenly, especially in that uncluttered silence, it sings to me.
There's the Wittgenstein biography that comes up several times in there.
And the funniness of that, as you remember, is that I read it in the Hermitage, and then one day I was walking along the road and I saw a young woman on a park bench reading a book, and I was intrigued, and it was the same book, and then 6 years later, the same young woman reading that same book again. And it's perfect, because Wittgenstein, the wonder of him is he's such a brilliant man, but he chose to teach at a little village school and to go, and he sort of saw the limits of brilliance, and he realized that what he did was much better than what he believed or what he wrote even.
One of the other things that I love about the book, it makes it almost novelistic, is there are so many great characters in there, and we could spend the rest of our 20 minutes talking about some of those characters. But for people who haven't read the book, or people who have, who are some of your favorites that you'd love to memorialize again?
Well, the first beauty of going there was to cut through all my stereotypes about monks. Because there are 15 or so monks in residence. The least dogmatic, most open-minded people. I know sometimes they go and teach at the Zen monastery over the hills. They have a Catholic Hindu ashram in India. They're open to anything. They're so grounded in what they believe, they're ready to learn from anyone. And the other surprise is that, as you read, there were actually certain women living around the property, helping them, not within the cloister, but on the fringes. And so I think one of my favorites is a French-Canadian woman in her 90s, who was living in the valley right next to the monks, and the monks looked after her. Initially, they invited her and her husband to come and live next to them because they felt they would be refreshed by a lay community and an artist as she is. Then when her husband died, until she was 97, the monks made sure she was okay, wheeled her up to the chapel on Sundays. And in some ways, because the monks are very busy, they're always working hard to make sure that they are well taken care of and the visitors are well taken care of. So she actually led the most contemplative life of all, and sometimes I felt, well, she was a place of wisdom too, because she was just sitting quietly, 35 years, overlooking the ocean, thinking about life and thinking a lot about death.
Well, and she thinks a lot about you too. That's one of the things that I love, is that she will take out her legal pad and she wants to jot down your entire conversations. She wants to share a film she's seen or a CD that she's been listening to. So that's what a great friendship, and an unlikely one too, right? Unlikely
one. And the dirty secret there, I must say, is I was mentioning how I'll pick any book from the bookstore, and when you read it in that silence, every word rings out to you, and even the smallest book suddenly seems like scripture. So she happened to read one of my books in that same silence, so suddenly my book seemed much more important than it would to anybody else because of that environment.
What about? I mean, you speak about that not everyone is suited for this life, especially for the long term. What are some of the qualities that people have that don't make them well suited for the hermitage?
Well, I'll say two things, and the first is that it's like falling in love, and each of us is drawn to a different kind of person. So I temperamentally am attracted to oceans, so the Big Sur coastline is ideal for me. There are other monasteries in the hills, and mountain people would like those. But in my experience, every place of worship in any order, monastery or convent I've seen anywhere in the world, still has this special silence. That's not just an absence of noise, it's really a presence of something, almost these transparent walls that have been created by decades of worship or prayer or meditation. So I would tell my friends, go to any retreat house, and not everyone will be the one of your dreams, but it'll always have a good effect. The second thing is that sometimes when I'm there, I felt I was in heaven as soon as I arrived, but then maybe on my fourth trip, suddenly I was there during a winter storm. The rain was pattering on the roof all night. The wind was shaking the foundations of the trailer. And I'd look outside and I couldn't see a single sign of human habitation. It was scary. It was like 40 days and nights in the wilderness. So nothing is guaranteed in those places. I think the larger aspect to your question, and the sadder one, is so many people are like me. We love to go there to stay for 3 days or a week or so. But fewer and fewer people are ready to make a lifelong commitment to be a monk or a nun. And so even my beloved hermitage is running out of monks. It's never short of people wanting to go on retreat. But nobody wants to give themselves for life. And it's a tough discipline there. Among other things, of course, the monks are living for the rest of their lives with 15 other people, maybe 12 of whom they would never want to spend a minute with. They're married to 15 people, only 2 of whom they've chosen maybe. So that's a tough thing too. But that's part of their training, to learn to love even the person you might otherwise want to run away from.
Well, you mentioned that it's a luxury to be able to go there, that you have the time and the money to do that. And I was also thinking, you talk about flame as a metaphor for you. The painted cave fire, while it wiped everything out, it sort of changed your life for the better. You lost 3 books, 3 manuscripts in the process. For a writer, just kind of completely devastating. I'm thinking now about our friends in the Palisades and Altadena who have gone through that. Can you talk a little bit about how to take this metaphor and combine it with this just sort of heartbreaking loss, and then also the specifics, which you also mentioned, of getting your house back up, going through the insurance and rebuilding. There's so much to do. How does one do that well? As you have done.
Well, I actually flew back into California to talk about the flame the first week of January, the very night the fires were wiping out the homes of so many people and so many of my friends down in Los Angeles. And in fact, when I went to our rebuilt house here in Santa Barbara, it was to find it pitch black, no phone service because of high winds here and the possibility that we'd be burnt down again. And then just 2 weeks later, I went and did an event in Pasadena, and many of the people there had lost their houses just 14 days earlier. Later I did one for Pacific Palisades too. And I was trying to share the fact that in my case, what initially presented itself as a calamity actually opened doors and made certain things possible, like going to this hermitage that never would have happened otherwise. And that in the immediate aftermath of such an event, it's hard really to assess what has been lost and what has gained. And when I look back on it, the biggest surprise is the night of the fire when I'd lost everything in the world. Because I was, my job then was to be a columnist for Time magazine. As soon as I went to a friend's house, I went to the computer and I wrote up the day that had just passed and been caught in the fire for 3 hours. And I ended my little piece with a haiku from the 17th century, in which the poet writes, "My house burnt down, I can now see better the rising moon." And much later, many years later, I thought, my goodness, the very night I lost everything in the world, something in me that's deeper than I am realized not everything was lost, and that maybe I'd be able to see my priorities more clearly. And so some instinct in me realized, well, don't just write this off as a catastrophe. The logistics are hard. It took us, my mother and myself, but mostly my mother, 3.5 years before she had a new house to go back to. The insurance companies are generous in our case. Most of them are fleeing.
They're long gone now, yeah.
Yes. During the Painted Cave fire, they were still in operation. But it was interesting when they came to us and said, we'll replace most of the goods you lost. And I realized I didn't need 90% of the books and clothes and furniture I'd accumulated. I'd always wanted to lead a simple, uncluttered life, and now I had the chance. So it's another example of how actually it made possible a fresh start whereby I could live much closer to the way I'd always wanted to live. And you mentioned it was hard for me to lose 3 manuscripts, which were in handwritten notes.
Did you ever get them back from recover them somehow mentally or anything like that?
Well, that's a beautiful way of putting it. I recovered them sort of imaginatively. So I was possessed by Cuba at that time, and that was going to be in my next book. I had 800 pages based on many trips to Cuba. I couldn't write that book, but losing my notes moved me to try to write fiction. So I wrote a novel set in Cuba, made up people, made up incidents, but drawing on my intense involvement in it. I'm sure I would have been too shy and scared as a non-fiction writer ever to try fiction, but suddenly the fire made it necessary and then propelled me over my apprehensions and defenses. So I'm grateful for that. And it also reminded me, you know, I was lucky enough because I grew up in England to parents from India, and then we moved to California. So I always had felt home is not really where you live, it's what lives inside you. And the day after the fire, I still had my mother, I still had my wife-to-be, I still had my words and my memories and my sense of purpose. So in some ways, I hadn't lost the essential stuff of life. And losing a house made me think what really is home. And in fact, moved me to spend much more time in Japan, which had always felt my secret home. But again, it liberated me in an unexpected way.
That's one of the things that I've been reading your books over the many years is you're often away from home. And yet I sense that your relationship with your wife, Hiroko, is just about as strong as a relationship could be between any husband and wife.
Thank you.
How does that work when you're apart so much? What's the dynamic?
There have been times when it's been hard on both of us, and I'm glad she's retired now, so we're nearly always together.
Oh, that's great.
But you know, when we first moved to California, it was actually, and I was 7 years old, it was actually cheaper to continue going to my old school in England and flying back 3 times a year to see my parents than to go to the best school in Santa Barbara. So from the age of 9, I was used to being very far from my parents, and I'm an only child, and therefore, as you say, used to sustaining relationships at great distance. And so that's always been second nature to me. I mean, to this day, most of my closest friends are from high school and junior high school. And they're on the other side of the world. I don't see them often, but somehow I keep the connection alive. And so even in our case, the initial 5 years, we were often on opposite sides of the ocean. But now, luckily, we're nearly always together. We're mostly in Japan, and then we come to Santa Barbara in the summers, but together.
Yeah.
But you're right, it's a challenge that more and more people are facing now. When we first began doing it in the 1980s, it was unusual, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's A Flame, the book we're talking about. It is a bit of a travel book in a way, but it's not traveling far from one of your homes. And did you think of it as travel writing? I mean, and that's kind of what you're known for.
Yeah, well, I'm happy you say that, because I think my definition of a trip is one that takes you into an entirely different part of yourself and sends you home both calm and joyful. And of all the places I've been lucky enough to go to, from Tibet to Antarctica and Yemen to North Korea. Nowhere so reliably sends me home a different person as the Hermitage. So it is the absolute travel, because I think travel is really another word for transport, or really for transformation. And this is the transforming place I found in my life. So I'm glad you see it as that way, because people would say, it's only 3.5 hours away from your mother's house. What's the big deal?
Yeah.
But
it's a big deal.
it's a big deal, and after 3.5 hours, I suddenly become a better, deeper self, I hope.
Yeah. But now we've been talking, and I always just love talking with you so much. But I asked in advance if you could read a few passages. Would you favor us with something?
Gladly. This is a bit of a long passage. Do we have time?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. We all want to dissolve, the old Zen monk in red bobble cap and thin glasses tells me, with a wry chuckle, as he greets me in the chill mountains behind Los Angeles, 300 miles south of Big Sur, where I've come at the end of December. We all need the experience of forgetting who we are. I think that's what love is, forgetting who you are. He flashes a crooked grin. Forgetting who you are is such a delicious experience, and so frightening. Bells toll through the dark, and I hear the sound of clappers. The stooped figure leads me up an unlit path between the trees to the meditation hall. The smell of incense everywhere as 30 students dressed in black take their seats in rows on either side of a central altar. Not a cough or tremor. When they break, they hasten out into the night and walk in single file between tall pines on the icy ground. Upon their return to the sound of a pounding drum, they recite the Heart Sutra at lightning speed, its syllables in Japanese a mere fusillade of sounds. For 7 days and 7 nights, they'll mostly be sitting in this hall, stepping out occasionally for visits to an outhouse and meals taken swiftly and in silence, mopping the leftovers with tea. In his small cabin, all friends are welcome, says the mat outside. My gracious host, twice the age of most of his comrades, assures me there's nothing special about this training. This cluster of cabins in the high dark mountains behind LA used to be a Boy Scout camp, though now in his mordant telling it's a penal colony. Every word and action in the emptiness decisive as a slash of calligraphy across blank pages. Towards the end of the next day, my guide to Zen practice leads me up again through great shafts of light between the conifers. The air vibrates with the memory of silence. We step into the room where the head of the community, a tiny 88-year-old Japanese man in heavy layered robes, is sipping something strong. I came to America to die, the abbot announces. I arrived when I was young, 55. I was fit as a jumping shrimp. He's never bothered to learn much English. Words are needless scratches on the clarity of what lies beyond. I look at the monk who's brought me here. I think of myself at 17 in the little hotel in Bombay, listening over and over to his songs about Marianne and Suzanne, the one who always told you when he came he was a stranger. Constantly in command, on point. And now, on this dark mountain, he carries himself like an anonymous grunt, scrubbing floors, cooking for the abbot, driving the old man to the doctor. He has no interest in holy men or golden sentences, he says. He knows how to play that game a little himself. This is simply the most helpful, the most imaginative response to the predicament of life that he has found. Here you find answers, I suggest to Leonard Cohen shortly before I leave. Here you find freedom from answers, he replies in the grave and gravelly baritone beloved by many. Freedom from questions, a landscape beyond doubt. Maybe I'll just read one little more paragraph.
Yes, please.
The songs, I realize as I drive down from his mountain, are often about suffering, panic and jealousy and pain. He never pretends he isn't defeated by love and himself and all the ways in which he isn't what he hopes to be. But they're never simply sad. They speak for a struggle in which words like happiness and sadness are beside the point. The only thing you can believe in, he keeps telling us, is a reality you can't comprehend. And one reason, I should say, why I included that was to show that the silence and liberation I'm describing, I think, is common to all traditions. That's, of course, a Zen monastery behind Los Angeles. Right. But when he describes what he's going through, it's almost identical to the Benedictine hermitage in Big Sur.
And you mentioned Leonard Cohen,
yes.
A character who appears throughout the book. What was it like to have been his friend?
Humbling.
Yeah.
I've been lucky enough to spend time with the Dalai Lama, but other than the Dalai Lama, Leonard was the deepest, kindest, wisest person I've ever met. And anyone who saw him in the final concerts he gave in his 70s could sense that there was something very special about this person and could feel his humility. And I would just tell them, if they saw the concerts, the private man was even more impressive than the public. And one thing that was so interesting to me, when I saw him give those last concerts, after somebody had made off with all his money and he was left bankrupt in the age of 73, was that, as people remember, he kneeled before his fellow musicians, he made himself invisible, he wasn't really trying to sell himself or his songs to the audience, and he really turned the great concert halls of the world into meditation halls. And I felt what he was doing was bringing the passion, the intimacy and the depth that I'd seen when he was meditating right into large arenas and passing on almost that sacredness to everybody who listened. And I think that's why it moved people as few rock and roll concerts ever do.
Yeah. We only have a couple of minutes left, and I wanted to talk about your writing. I may just have to spend 2 minutes praising it because it's so beautiful. I mean, it's so poetic in a way that I think of as real poetry, not sometimes we'll use that phrase loosely. It's so vivid and imagistic. If people are reading the book, there's often, the passages are quite short. There's a lot of white space in between them. It's a bit like one of my favorite books, A Beginner's Guide to Japan, which is almost like a bunch of koans, against each other. So you all are already using silence and white space really significantly in the book itself, I feel.
Thank you. I mean, that's high praise coming from a poet. Thank you. And I think one of the things I was doing as we're taking out the time markers was in the hope that a reader could pick up the book at any place and read just for 1 or 2 pages and be brought back to a slower, calmer, deeper self. Because we're all in such a frenzy of rush and distraction. I think we're longing for release from that. And I tried to write the book in a way with lots of white space at a human pace, very slow narrative to rescue us from the fury, as it were.
Well, you've succeeded just beyond your wildest dreams.
Thank you.
In the last 30 seconds that I have with you, I'm always loving to hear the advice a guest would give to young people who are trying to start the craft. What's the 30-second version of that you would give to a young writer?
Find what you see when you're walking down the street that none of your friends see. Because each of us has something particular in our background or our passions or our experience that opens a door that's closed to other people. And when we talk of finding our voice, I think that's what we're looking for, our particular set of eyes that most people don't have. So it takes a while to find out what is distinctive to you, but find that, and then that will be your gift to the world.
Beautiful words to end our interview on. Thank you so much, Pico. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, David.
The Creative Community is a co-production of TVSB in Santa Barbara and Caps Media in Ventura. I'm your host, David Starkey, and we'll see you next time.